Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Welcome to our last Fall 2024 Tejano virtual event. This session will be on how to improve your credit score with Enrique Lechuga. This session will be recorded so that you may come back to it later if you need, and so others who may have missed out on today's events will be able to come back and watch it. This event will provide Tejano Passport points, and the code will be posted on the chat towards the end of the session. So now, at this time, please mute your mics for the best sound experience. Otherwise, the feedback could interfere with information the presenter will be sharing today. Without further ado, I'll pass it on to Mr. Lechuga so that we may begin.
Awesome. Thank you, Hema, and happy Friday. Awesome Friday to everyone. Hopefully, everyone's doing well on this awesome Friday afternoon for what I'm thinking is, if I'm not mistaken, the last TVE of 2024. So, what an honor and privilege it is to be able to present this afternoon. So, thank you all. I do want to start off this presentation by thanking Patricia, Hema, and Clara, our facilitators this afternoon, for being so helpful and facilitating and just throughout the whole process. You all have been super awesome. I do want to give out a huge shout out to my NDP team that gave me a lot of guidance for this presentation. Even reminded me not to talk too much about myself this day, because apparently I can do that. And then I also wanted to thank each and every single one of you all for joining me this afternoon so that I can talk about one of my greatest passions, which is credit. I know that at face value that may seem a little bit of boring. For some of us, it may be daunting because we have had those challenges with credit. But at the end of the day, the whole purpose behind this presentation is that I get to inform. I'm very fortunate that I've been in this industry for about 16 years. And I've seen the huge impact that credit can have on families. I've seen dreams come true because of credit. I have seen dreams shattered because of credit. So again, I just feel it is my responsibility and honor to be able to share what I have learned throughout those 16 years, especially since unfortunately credit is something that is not taught quite often. It's not taught in schools. I do have a great passion for this. So once again, just thank you so much for joining me on here. Let me go ahead and get started and start off by doing one of the things that I just enjoy so much, as one of my colleagues told me, to talk about myself. I'm just kidding-ish, but I just want to do a little background on myself to let you know, put a name to face on here and let you know my experience and how I came to learn about credit. So as I had mentioned, was mentioned earlier, my name is Enrique Lechuga, and I am an academic tutor for I've been an academic tutor since 2022 for the awesome MDP campus. I do want to start off with my academic experience for a specific reason. I'm very fortunate that I do have an associate in business administration from EPCC. I have a bachelor's in finance from UTEP, master's in business administration from UTEP as well. And right now I'm working on my doctoral work in business management from from Grand Canyon University. And the reason I do bring that up is because even throughout that whole schooling in business, none of these classes have ever talked about credit or credit worthiness. So again, it is just something that for whatever reason, well, I do have my own thoughts on it, but for whatever reason, it's not being taught out there. So I do want to go ahead and give out a couple pointers that should help out on here, because at the end of the day, I want everybody to be a little bit more informed. I want people to be able to make some decisions that are going to be beneficial for the long run for you and your family. And just kind of going over a little bit more of my experience on here. I have been in banking. I was in banking from 2008 to 2019, and I'm very fortunate that I get to lead my own organization right now doing credit counseling and credit repair that I have been doing since 2019. Having said that, let's get to some of the fun stuff on here. I do want to talk about the anxieties behind this presentation. I can assure you I only lost about 8 hours of sleep last night. I'm kidding about that. But this is a presentation that I get to do quite often. Excuse me. And I usually do it in person. So right now that I'm doing it virtual, it's a little hard to gauge if people are understanding or grasping or have any questions on here. So the biggest thing behind today is the timing behind it. It is one of those presentations that I do have about 20 minutes worth of material. And it's one of those that if we have too many questions on here, it will go super long, but we also don't have too many questions on here. We have very few questions. It might be ending soon on here. So what am I trying to say? I'm saying let's have some fun and help each other out on here. I do want to get to some information because I was able to listen to Mr. Carrizales' presentation earlier, and that hour does go by fast on here. So, and also just want to let you know, as I think Patricia shared on here, if you do have any questions on here, please let me know right away. Raise your hand. I will get to it. If for whatever reason it is something that we're going to be covering a little later on, I'll let you know. I'll jot your name down on here. That way I can make sure that you get that information. Or if you want to save those questions for the end, I'll do my part on here to make sure that we have ample time for these questions on here. And as I had mentioned earlier to our amazing facilitators, it is something that I'm super passionate about. So if I do start getting really excited and start talking too fast, just let me know and I will slow it down on here. But awesome, everyone. This next slide on here just has the agenda, which I am going to go ahead and just skip because we're actually going to go slide by slide on here. And let me go back to talking a little bit about myself on here, which I'm doing so to let you know how I came about this experience, what I've learned on here, and why is it impactful to me. So once again, I was in the lending industry for about 11 years. Excuse me. And in that process, when I was a lender, one of my goals was to get people approved for loans. And when I did commercial lending specifically, one of the objectives was to go out into the community, meet with business owners, and a lot of the times I grew a huge passion because a lot of these business owners would come in with awesome, wonderful ideas that would impact their lives, impact their families on here. But for a lot of these business owners, for the new business owners, they needed to get some type of capital. So they needed a loan. And unfortunately, a lot of them, because of their credit, would not qualify. So during this time period as well, I was super fortunate that I was managing a credit counseling organization. And plain and simple, the way we would help out each other is that if I would get a clients that would not get approved for a loan because of their credit, I would send them to this gentleman, to this organization, and then once they were ready, they would send them back. So that's how I started getting a little bit into it. Now, this organization itself moved out of El Paso, moved to Dallas about 2016. So that's when I took over their book and started learning how credit worked and how to go about it. Now, the next two on here that I have, which says my own credit situation and life happens, I just want to kind of be a little transparent this afternoon. And plain and simple, life does happen. For myself specifically, what I mean about that, I'll give an example. Late 2010, so about 2016, 17, my mom was facing cancer. I do like to share that she is cancer free since 2018. Now, the reason I bring that up is because during that time period, it did come between having to pay her mortgage or having to pay my own credit cards. And so, as you can imagine, I did what I hope was wise, and I started paying her mortgage, and I did get backed up on my own credit card payments. One of them even went into collections. So because it was my credit, I kind of experimented with that, if that makes any sense. And that's how essentially I learned a lot about this because being myself, I wasn't too worried about messing things up as I would to a client. But plain and simple, it's one of the things that I tell my clients quite often. Life happens, you know. Just because you're late on payments doesn't mean that you're a bad person or anything. And I always tell my clients when we review their credit reports, we got to analyze not so much about where we've been at, but we got to analyze where we're at so we know where we are going. And so let me go ahead and just to let you all know about some of the background that I have and the knowledge, because we do have to do what is called continuing education for this type of the organization. And right now we are licensed and bonded in the states of Texas, New Mexico, Arizona, Nevada, California, Colorado, and Georgia. Let me head out into this next slide on here. Now I'm going to start getting into, well, enough about me, right? Let's start getting into the specifics of credit. And in academic standpoint, I always, especially for us as either working for the college, students, or we're moving up in our careers with our degrees. I always like to kind of compare it to schooling to see how it can help us out as we're getting ready for those next steps in life. And one of the best ways I like to compare it to in an academic setting is to refer to credit score as your GPA and to refer to your credit report as your transcript. So when we talk about credit, I do like to share that it's a two-part thing. So you have your credit scores and then you have your credit reports. And I'm just going to read some quick definitions that I just got off of Google to hopefully make this point on here. So GPA on here, I got an average of your grades for classes you have taken. The better your grades, the higher your GPA. With a higher GPA, you may qualify for more scholarships, more grants. You also increase the likelihood of being accepted into the school of your dreams. So having comparing that to a score like your GPA is a representation of how you have managed your credit history, loans, credit cards. The higher your score, the more financial options you will have at a lower interest rate. You also increase the likelihood of being approved for a loan for your dream house, your dream car. And one thing that I did live out on here, which we'll be talking about a little bit later on, is careers as well. So that is your score. Now we also talk about credit reports. And credit reports, I like to compare it to your transcripts. So think of your credit reports as your transcript. It shows the history of your accounts in comparison to your classes, shows the type of accounts you have opened, current, closed, or paid off, and the payment history and any comments creditors may have placed on your report. The reason I kind of share this in an analogy is, let's assume, and from the academic standpoint, or career wise, let's assume you are an engineer for NASA and you're needing to hire a top notch engineer to work with you. If you get an application and all that they put on there is a 4.0 GPA, well, that does sound amazing, but we also got to look into the transcripts to make sure it is comparable to what they are applying for. And I do apologize in advance if we do have any underwater basket weaving degree majors on here, but let's assume you are a NASA engineer, you're trying to get somebody, you do know that they have a 4.0 GPA, but they have a degree in underwater basket weaving. It might not be comparable to that. I do apologize if we have any underwater basket weaving majors here. I do not know if that would be comparable actually, but just to give an analogy on here, hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. So why is this important? When you buy big investments, and what I mean by that is either houses, land, properties, cars, they're not only going to be looking at your score, but they're also going to be looking at your reports. So that's why it's very important that we do take a look into your credit reports and see everything's doing well. And as we'll go over a little bit to make sure that you have what is called a good credit mixture to make sure that your reports are also looking healthy. At this point, I do want to open it up to see if we have any questions so far. If not, I'll go ahead and continue. Like I said, if you do have any questions, just let me know on here. And I kind of like this slide on here. Just who cares about credit? So what is important on here, right? And this is some of the things that we'll be going out through throughout the whole presentation. But plain and simple, your credit scores and reports can dictate either loan approvals, so loan approvals if you get approved or not. If you do get approved, your credit score will influence your interest rate. So if you do, as many of you all know, and we'll go over it in more detail in a little bit, the interest rate is how much you're paying for that loan on here. So obviously, the higher the interest rate, the more you're paying, and so you want to make sure that that is as low as possible. Your credit score will also influence your house and car payments. Um, it can also influence any apartment that you're trying to get. So just to kind of briefly go into that, anytime that you do get an apartment, well, I should say most times, they are going to do a credit check. They're not necessarily looking for the score, but what they're just looking for to see if you've owed any other apartments where you might have broken the lease and then have gone to collections. And then careers, this is one I want to go a little bit more into detail on here, because it has just become more of a thing lately where for jobs and careers, they are looking at your credit on here. Especially government jobs. The way they see it is that your credit scores and reports can be indicative of your responsibilities, of your character, and then also, I'm myself, I'm very fortunate that I'm working a lot with, well, not, well, I've had several clients for Fort Bliss and CBP that are needing to work on their credit because the way they see it for some of those positions is that if you have too much debt, it may lead to possible bribes, getting bribes from individuals on here. And so that's one of the things that they look into. So again, that's why it's very important that we at least know what's on our credit report and what's going on there. But awesome, guys. On this next slide, this is where I want to make it a little bit interactive to see if anybody can help me out. Once again, I point this out quite a bit because as you can tell, I have an issue with this, that this is not taught as often as it should be. But having said that, I want to start getting into credit basics, what credit is and all that. And I want to see if anybody can name me either one or three of the major credit bureaus. We got one on here, Experian, TransUnion. Patricia's on a roll here. One more, one more. Okay. You're good. There you go. And Hema said it on here, Equifax. So perfect, guys. Let me go ahead and start going over this one. And I apologize, it seems a little bit small on here. But starting to get into credit. So when we're talking about credit, one of the things we are talking about is the three credit bureaus, Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, which were awesomely said on here. One of the things that I always like to point out first is that they're not government agencies. They're actually privately owned companies on here. For some reason, I do have a lot of clients that think that they are government agencies, but they are not. Another thing, big thing behind them is that they're not connected. They work separately on here. So for anybody that's looking into your reports for whatever reason, maybe just for accuracies or getting ready for a loan, it's always very important that we are able to look into all three. And what I want to ask for a little favor in a little bit on here is that I'll be sending out a link. I didn't put it on the PowerPoint, but a link to one of the services that I really like to recommend to be able to look into all three credit reports. Um, and so, like I said, it is very important that we always look into all three. And stuff that is included on your credit reports is going to be your personal info, loans, credit cards, charge off, collections. And so you can even have information as far as bankruptcies, any awesome, Matthew. And see, Norman, these are also websites to place fraud. Absolutely, yes, ma'am. So great point on here. Let me come back to that one here shortly. But yes, and so your credit report will show information from your credit history. And as Norma pointed out on here, it's an excellent, excellent point. Um, Usually when you apply for a loan, they're only going to look into one of the three credit bureaus unless you're buying one of those big investments, like I said, a house or property. So that's why you want to also look into all three. And then you can also put, like Norma said, fraud alerts or even freezes on your credit. So let's assume I put a freeze on Experian, and then I go apply for a car, and they're going to be using Experian. When they run the application at the dealership or at the bank, they'll get an alert on there that I have to call in to unfreeze it first. That way, it kind of protects me if there is any potential fraud on there. So definitely an awesome point on there, Norma, which I thank you for. But absolutely on here. So very, very good point. Having said that, going back to the how some of the companies will only use one of the three credit reports. So again, if you're buying something like a house or property, they look into all three. Anything else, let's assume you go buy a car, a credit card, personal loan, they're only going to look into one of the three. So you can use that to your advantage if you know how your reports are looking. Let's assume that for whatever reason, Equifax is doing the best, where you can go to a bank and to ask, hey, which credit report are you going to be pulling? And that way you can go to somewhere where your report is doing the best. That way your chances of qualifying and better interest rate are higher on there, if that makes sense. And then just two other quick pointers that about credit reporting agencies that I like to show up to share. They're not too common on here, but for example, we have LexisNexis, which usually does government reporting. So what I mean by that is bankruptcies, liens, and judgments. For example, let's assume you declare bankruptcy. When you declare bankruptcy as a state, and it's not the state, in this case, state of Texas would not be the one reporting to the credit bureaus. It would be one of these other companies. In this case, it's LexisNexis that does the reporting for them. And then another common one among the banking system is what's called check systems. Check system, like I said, works mostly within the banks, which is like your Wells Fargo, Bank of America, I'm drawing a blank on here, but those big banks on here. And what happens is that if you ever have an account that goes in the negative and you don't pay it off, which is called either collection or charge off, they'll report it amongst the other banks. So let's assume that would happen with Wells Fargo. If you try and go open up an account with Bank of America, they would be able to see that on there. They would run that report kind of the same way when you apply for a loan, but it would be through check systems. And then at that point, if there is something going on with another bank, it would be up to the new bank to see if they want to proceed with opening an account or not. But awesome, guys. That is what I have for credit, the credit agencies. Any questions so far? Awesome. If not, I got another question on here. This one might be a little bit trickier. It's not too much of common information, but I'm sure somebody will get it on here. Um, awesome on here. So I have it. What happens when your account is frozen? By that, Patricia, do you mean your credit report? Yes, perfect. Yes, ma'am. Yeah, going back to that example, let's assume I'm might be a victim of identity theft. What would be wise is that I call the credit bureaus and I do place a warning and a freeze on the credit bureaus, and I do have to call one by one. And what happens is that there are you if you run an application for a loan, it wouldn't go through. So let's assume I put a freeze on all three credit bureaus. I go to GECU, try to apply for a loan. They wouldn't be able to proceed. They would get an error message saying that I would have to call in to unfreeze it so that they can proceed with the application on here. Hopefully that answered your question. If not, I'll definitely come back on here. Awesome. Yes, ma'am. Perfect. But yeah, you guys are sharing some awesome questions on here, and hopefully that made sense on here. And I'm trying to think if I'm missing anything in that end. But if not, I'm notating it on here. Maybe if anything comes up, I'll come back to it on here. But this next question that I have so far on here is who's to see if anybody can name either one or two of the most common companies that generate scores. That one's a little trickier because kind of going back to a point that I missed earlier is that Equifax, TransUnion, and Experian, their credit reporting agencies, they themselves do not generate a score for you. So there's other two companies that actually, well, there's several companies out there that will generate a score for you. And the two most common ones are Fair Isaac Corporation, which is FICO, and then you have your Vantage scores. Plain and simple, or just Fair Isaac Corporation, so your FICO score, it has been around for a very, very long time. So most companies, most banks use your FICO score. A much newer one is what's called Vantage scores, and that one is the one that Credit Karma uses. Um, yeah, yes, ma'am. So that is a common misconception on the credit bureaus generate scores, and it's not the credit bureaus, it's this other companies on here. And just to kind of give a quick glance at the scores on here. So most banks, since FICO has been around so long, they use FICO, and then the newer one is Vantage on here. And like I said, that's the one that um sorry, check Credit Karma. Sorry, I drew a blank there. The Credit Karma uses, and so I don't know if you guys have heard, but that Credit Karma, they say that it's not your real score. It's not necessarily that it's not your real score. It's just a lot of places are not using that score right now. So it's when you go and apply, you might get something different because more than likely they're going to be using your FICO scores. Hopefully that makes a little bit of sense on here. Um, and but the way they work is that each one has its own algorithm to analyze your report, and based on what's going on in your report, they generate a score for you. So they just have different systems to calculate a score for you, if that makes sense. But yeah, for the most part, the banks are going to be using FICO scores. So that's what I tell my clients to be on the lookout for. To make things a little bit more complicated, there are different FICO scores for different purposes. For example, you do have your generic FICO score, then you have a FICO score for mortgages, a FICO score for cars, and a FICO score for credit cards. And so what I tell my clients usually, and what I like to share, is to have a service where you can view scores on here. I would like to recommend, and I'll share that link here a little bit later on. Um, Perfect question, Patricia. That one I'll come back to here shortly. But what I do like to recommend is that you have a service where you can view all three credit reports and credit scores. Um, that way, even if you have Credit Karma on here, now Credit Karma gives you two out of the three, but if you do have Credit Karma, and if you see your score drop, well, at least you can look into it on here. It should be indicative of something going on. So if it goes up, hey, something good's going on, and your FICO score should also be going up. But if you see your score drop, even if it's on Credit Karma, well, that way you can look into to see what's going on in here. And Patricia has another awesome question on here where do medical bills affect your credit? And they do on here. You hear a lot that medical collections, medical accounts cannot influence your score, but there's a huge loophole around that is that the medical institutions like the hospitals, they don't report you directly, but they get a collection agency to report you. And that collection is the one that does affect your credit score. Now, it's a Patricia brings up a great point because if you're buying a house, the debt that is on there because of medical collections will not influence your debt to income ratio, but nonetheless, it does affect your score on here. So it does have an impact on there. I know we have a lot of misconception with that concept as well, but yes, to address it directly, they do affect it. And does checking your score drop it? Another excellent question on here. So for Mia, there's two type of revisions for your score. So for example, if you're viewing your score yourself through either Credit Karma, Experian, or any of those services, that's what's called a soft hit, and it does not affect your score at all. Now, if you look at your report, it should show up as soft hits on there. That way you can kind of view it and make sure it's you, not just somebody random logging in. But when it's somebody else reviewing your credit for you, which is usually done through a loan application. So let's assume I go to GECU and I apply for a loan, they're going to look into my credit score and my credit report. That can start dropping your score. And what I mean by that, there's a lot of factors that play into it. Um, so it also depends on how solid your score and your reports are looking at right now. So let's assume you're maybe 18 and you just start off with credit. Any little thing that happens is going to influence your score. as to oppose to somebody that maybe has had credit for 40 years. But one of the big things is that you do not want to apply too much because that can look to the creditors as risky behavior. Um, I'll just be honest, put it out there. It looks like you're desperate for money if you start applying too many places. So they do see that as a major red flag on there. So if you view your credit, it does not affect it. It's only when somebody else checks it for you usually for a loan application or even for like a job position, if that makes sense. And I know some of the subjects have a lot of information. I'm hopefully addressing your questions directly on here, but if there's something that wasn't clear, like I said, just let me know on here, okay? But awesome. Any questions on the scores themselves? Well, you guys have been having some awesome questions on here. Let me get to this next one on here, which is what do your scores mean on here? And so credit scores can range anywhere from a 300 to an 850. In the 16 years that I've been doing this, I've only seen one person in the 300s, and that took a lot of work to get there in the first place on here. So I do have a graph on here that kind of shows the ranges on here. So for example, anything between a 300 to a 579 is considered very poor. Once you start getting into the 580s to the 670s, you start being in the fair category, which I would say about 80% of my clients are at. Then you have you good from 670 to 739. You have 740 to 799 considered very good, and then the 800s is usually considered exceptional. I just want to throw out something quickly on here that there's times when I have clients that at this point they're just trying to get their score up as high as possible. I'm just gonna give you my 2 cents on here that usually once you're in the 680s above, you're pretty much good to go on here. At that point, it's just more of it looking good. But usually, especially like once I'll say the 700s. Once you're in the 700s, if you go and apply for a loan, they're pretty much just begging you to sign for a loan. They're giving you several options on here. The 800s usually just takes time because there can't be any new accounts with a certain time frame on here. But just to kind of show that on here, I work with a lot of lenders here in El Paso for mortgages. We can start getting clients approved in the 580s, but that's where they usually have to do a huge down payment with high interest rates. Usually to start getting into what I call a good loan, to a reasonable loan with a low interest rate is usually in the 620s. Any questions on this so far? Perfect. Let me get to this one on here. So this is one of the major importance of why credit is so important on here. Um, it's not just a score, it's not just something, but for example, on here, this is how it can affect your interest rate, which affects hugely, if you can see on here, your monthly payment. So let's assume you're going out there and you're trying to buy a car for $20,000. On the left hand side, you have good credit. Good credit left, bad credit on the right. So let's assume you get a car, $20,000 for 5 years, which is the usual term. At a interest rate of 6.0, you're gonna get a monthly payment about 387 bucks. Now let's assume you're struggling with your credit right now. Same car, same term. Now you're looking at about a 26% interest rate. That takes up your payment to $599, making a difference about $212 per month on here. Now, I don't know about you guys, but $212 goes a long way for me right now, especially with the holidays. But it's a huge difference, especially, and I should have done the math, but the 200 per month for 60 months, that's a lot of money on there, which can buy maybe another car on here. So it is one of those things that from some of my clients, we're working on their credit. Maybe they're not there yet, and I tell them let's wait, hold off a little bit because as you can see, it can have major implications on your monthly payments and a lot of other things as well. But awesome, guys. So this is the one slide that I do want to take a little bit more time into. So I'm glad we're doing good on time right now. So this is the information I want to give you all so you all can do decisions and have the knowledge to help out your own scores and your own reports. And this is how our credit scores are calculated on here. This is where I usually start getting several questions on here, so I'm going to make sure that I get to them. So I have this pie chart on here. As you can see, bottom left-hand corner, you have 35% of your payment, 35%, which is your payment history. Plain and simple on that one is, are your payments done on time or not? Let me read this question. So we have no debt, our score goes down. That is correct. I'm going to Patricia brought it up, so I'm going to share on here my own 2 cents on here. We get rewarded for having debts, plain and simple. How we manage our debt is what indicates our scores on here. But yes, ma'am, if we have no debt on here, we technically have no credit. And unfortunately, I see those situations quite often where people might even have the money or a large down payment for a house, but if they have no credit, they are not able to get that house. So that's where I'm presenting this on here. So the last thing I want to do is that get anybody in major debt on here, but hopefully acquire the healthy debt to help out your scores. And you have to have constant debt. Yes, ma'am. Very directly on here. It's when and I'll go over some specifics on here, but in order to have good credit, you got to be indebted. There's got to be some type of accounts on here. There's two type of accounts that you always want to have open credit reports, and we'll get into those specifics here, I believe, in the next slide. But you guys are having some awesome questions on here. Thank you for that. But having said that, so 35% of your payment history is, 35% of your score is calculated by your payment history. Plain and simple, are your payments done on time or not? So this is huge on here. And I do want to notate that most lending institutions won't report you late to the credit bureaus unless it's 30 days or more late. There's to this day there is it's the military star account that actually will report you if you're 1 day late, but I believe that's the only account I've ever seen. So it gives you a little bit of a grace period on here. But at the end of the day, just be on time with your payments on here. I've seen it with some of my clients that I'm working on their credit. They miss one payment, and one time I did have a client that dropped them almost 140 points. So that's just the biggest part on here that you want to make sure that your payments are done on time. Now, going back to Patricia's point, in order for it to show up that you have payments on time, you had to have at least a loan on here. Which, and I say it that way because it leads me to this next part on here about 30% amount of debt, which is specific to your credit cards. So yes, you do have to have at least a loan and a credit card open at all times in order to have good credit on here. What this specifically means at 30% is that you do want to make sure that you are using your credit cards so that they get reported to the credit bureaus. You just want to make sure that they are by no means maxed out. In fact, the recommended amount is 25% of your credit limit. Excuse me. So kind of to give some specifics, let's assume you have a $1,000 credit card. You want to make sure that your balance does not exceed more than 250 bucks of that. Now, it is one of those that you want to use it at least once a month, maybe use it for something small. For example, some of my clients, what I'll do is that I will have them get a credit card, put Netflix subscription on there, and just make the monthly minimum payments on there so it's being used, but not have a huge balance on it. But yeah, so plain and simple, you do want to make sure you have at least a credit card and that you're using it with make sure that the balance does not exceed 25% of its limits. Next part on here is the length of credit history. How long have your accounts been open for? So that's also going back to Mia's question on here. You don't want to apply too much on here because it'll affect the credit history on here, how long your accounts have been open for. Just to kind of give a very simplified example, let's assume you've had an account open for 5 years, and then today you open up a brand new one. It takes the average on there, so your credit history instead of being 5 years, is going to drop down to 2.5. So that's where several factors play into it, but just going to address that. You do want to make sure that that is doing well. And sorry, I got on here with Patricia's question. If we close an open account, does it drop too? Yes, ma'am, it does because you are playing into that credit history concept there. So one of the big things I tell my clients, especially in credit cards, if you don't have like a monthly fee or an annual fee on it, don't close it down because it'll hurt your payment history and the credit utilization, that 30%, the amount of debt on here. So closing down a credit card can have a huge negative impact on your score. In regards to the report, it doesn't affect it that much, but it does have a huge negative impact on your score. And then usually when you pay off an account, usually you will see that very first month that if it's not offsetted with a new loan, that your score will drop too. So again, this is my own personal opinion on here that we are rewarded to be in debt. Again, this is my own opinion on here, but that is in order to have that good credit, you do have to have open accounts, if that makes sense. And the last one here, so 10% is new credit. That's going back to Mia's point of the new accounts that you've opened. If you've opened up way too many in the last couple of months, they can see that as a major red flag. So you don't want to apply for too much on here. And then the last 10% is what's called credit mix. What that means is that you want to make sure that at all times you have at least an installment loan and a revolving credit on your report, which I'm going to go over one by one here, I believe in the next slide on here. But I know we are having some amazing questions, so just want to make sure do we have any questions so far? I'm stalling while I take a quick sip of water. But awesome. Let me get to those next slides on here. But perfect. On here, so I do want to talk about those two type of credits that you want to have open at all times in order to have good credit. Installment loan. So that one is an installment loan, which is uh, technically the definition to it is a closed-ended credit account that you pay back over a set period of time. So think of that as your car loans, mortgage loans, or personal loans, where you go in, you say, I want a $5,000 loan, they give you the loan and you're gonna pay it back in 2 years. And then once you're after the 2 years, you're done with it. You don't have to worry about it anymore unless you reapply for another loan. And let me go to the next slide to kind of compare it, and hopefully it clicks on here. The next one on here is your revolving credit. So on this one, think of it as your credit card. And so the definition to it is credit that is automatically renewed as debts are paid off. So for example, your credit card. Let's assume you have a credit card for $1,000. You use it all, but you pay it off. Well, it's still available on there. And so that concept that it's keeps being open is why it's called revolving credit. And so the two most common uh, forms of revolving credit are credit cards and lines of credits. Just to kind of address the point behind a line of credit, think of a line of credit as a credit card just without the plastic. Usually you have an account that you can either transfer out of or call the bank so they can transfer into your checking accounts. But any questions on those two concepts, installment loans and revolving credits? Awesome, guys. Let me get into this next one on here. I do have a question. Awesome. No, thank you, Patricia. Hopefully, I'm answering questions on here, and I know it's a lot of information, um, and I'm glad that they are recorded at all. And at the last slide, I do have my contact information. That way, if there's any questions that I wasn't able to get to, please feel free to reach out to me. It would be my pleasure to assist you with that. And then, awesome. So right here, I want to go over the specifics of how to get your credit. So what I mean by this on here is that to have always at least one loan open. Now, one loan, which is installment loan, and have at least one credit card open that you are using at least once a month, making sure that the balance does not exceed 25% of its credit limit. Um, I know many of you guys have heard 30% to keep it under 30%, and that is entirely true. Just I'll be honest that with my clients, if I tell them to keep it at 30%, they will keep it right at 30%, and then either a charge or interest kicks in and takes them over. So that's why I say 25, just going to give us a little bit of leeway. This next part on here, it says 10% of your credit limit. That part, I've seen it where for some of my clients that maybe are a couple points short from being able to get a loan for their house, bringing it down to 10% usually increases their points a little bit on here, not too much. You see the big effect when if you're over 25, once you bring it under 25, that's what you usually see about 20-30 point increase. And the next one on here is credit increase can lower your score each about 2 to 5 points each. And I was going back to what Mia asked that when you check your credit, and I get a credit increase specifically is when you go and apply for a loan. So a couple points on here. I highly suggest that if you ever are trying to buy a car, you go to your bank or your credit union first. The reason I say that is because if you go to the dealership, they are interested in getting you a deal where you're going to sign off on it. So they will run your credit in multiple places. And each one can lower your score anywhere from 2 to 5 points. So I do have a perfect example with one of my clients. He did have, he went to buy a car and they ran his credit about, I believe it was about 15 times. His score, I do believe it dropped about 40 points just within that time period. And then he didn't even buy the car. And so it really set us back on here. And for stuff like that, it's just time that for it to bounce back with those points. But so just be careful. I know some of us will, especially around the holidays, start getting those credit card applications, those loan options. So just be careful on here. Don't go too crazy and try to apply it everywhere. And that is one of the things with my clients that once they start getting good credit, they do get those promotions on here, and then they go and apply everywhere, and so that usually sets us back. The average on here is 2 to 4 times that you apply per year. Now, again, there's a lot of factors that play into this on how much it can actually affect your score. Let's assume if you have had credit for 40 plus years and you've been well on your accounts, a credit inquiry might not affect you as much as you can imagine to somewhere where everything is fresh on there. So guys, any questions so far? Okay. I see on here that you can even buy gap insurance for your car at a bank. Correct. And then Isabel brings up another good point I want to go over. But yeah, as you all know, the gap insurance that should offset the difference between what the car is valued and what the remaining balance on it is. And credit can also influence, unfortunately, your insurance rates as well. That's one that I kind of learned a little not too long ago. Um, if you do any policy changes or change carriers for your insurance, they look into your credit, and that can also influence your monthly payment and your premiums. So another reason just to be on the lookout for your credit here. But awesome, awesome point, Isabel. Awesome, guys. We're doing great on time. I'm going to leave some ample time for questions on here. There's a couple of other things that I want to go over. Other credit report facts. And so we've gone over the accounts that you want to have on your credit reports. These are the accounts that you do not want to have on your credit report. But again, life happens. So we have negative accounts, is what I call them on here. You have two types, charge-offs and collections. They're very similar. It's just who is handling the account at that time. So for example, let's assume I have an account with GCU. I do not work for GCU. I just mentioned them because they're the most common one here in El Paso, and everybody knows about them. Let's assume I have an account at GCU and I do not pay it. It's going to go in the negative, and eventually it's going to get closed off. And if GECU still carries that account, it's considered a charge off. The difference between that and a collection is that in this case, if GCU were to sell it to a collection agency, then it's just considered a collection. And that's where you have those creditors that are calling you nonstop, trying to get you to even settle those accounts, trying to collect that money. But that's the only difference on here. But those technically are derogatory accounts that you do not want to have on your report. Again, we know life happens on here. There's several processes that can be done to remove them. But if you just let it ride, if you do not do anything with them, they will be on your report for at least 7 years. Okay, and I'm sorry, that was one of the questions on here. I already ruined that one. But and then you also have late payments, and again, late payments can drastically drop your score. So you want to make sure that you are on time with your payments, especially if you're working on your credit. Like I said, just being late one payment can really set you off course on here. Okay, any questions on these derogatory accounts? Does old stuff still count? Correct, yes, ma'am. Will it go away? Correct. So anything negative, and I kind of want to get in, I don't want to get too much into the specifics of what we do as an organization because I'm not here for the organization, I'm here to inform. But there's several processes you can do to remove accounts beforehand. In fact, I do have a little slides with a little bit of information on it. Anything negative, if you don't do anything, sorry, if you don't do anything about it, anything negative will be on your report for 7 years. The good thing is that positive accounts stay on there for life. So they're always helping you out and kind of show on there that you were good with them. But by law, anything negative will stay on there for 7 years. Let me see if it's this next slide that kind of goes over a little bit about this. Yes, perfect. So this is one of the reasons you always want to make sure you are reviewing your credit reports. I do recommend at least twice a year. And I'll share that the service that I like to recommend where you're able to view all three credit reports along with your FICO scores for free. And so you're going to stay on top of them. And luckily, we do have a law that's meant to protect us as consumers, which is called the Fair Credit Reporting Act. It was established just for that purpose to protect consumers from unwarranted reporting. And so what this means is that let's assume I never had an account with GCU. They can't report me just for no reason. I think that's pretty straightforward. But unfortunately, it happens way too often. I'll give you an example. My dad and I, we have the same name. I am a junior, but it'll happen way too often where accounts and reports are showing up on mine or vice versa. And it's not even bad accounts. Sometimes they're good, but where stuff gets reported to the credit bureaus, they don't verify the full information. They just say, oh, it's got to be Enrique Lechuga from this zip code. It's got to be this person. And so a lot of stuff gets reported incorrectly. And so that's where I'm going with some of this information because by law we have the right to challenge anything that is not reported correctly to the credit bureaus. And in fact, if you have anything negative in your report, you can dispute it with the credit bureaus where they have to fully investigate that account belongs to you. And if they can't fully provide that information, it has to fall off of your credit report. So it's kind of going into one of the strategies that is used to remove some of these accounts beforehand. because one major point to it is that the credit bureaus do have 30 days to finalize that investigation. So let's assume I see my report and GCU is reporting me for no reason. It shouldn't be on there. I contact the credit bureaus, they contact GCU, and if the credit bureaus aren't able to fully prove to me that it's mine, it has to fall off of your report on there. Also, another reason to go ahead and start to continue reviewing your reports is to spot for any potential fraud or identity theft. On your reports, it does have your personal information and usually has an Equifax for sure. It shows all the addresses that have ever appeared on your file. Experian and TransUnion just shows, I think, the last four. But that's I like for my clients to review that because it can be indicative of maybe something going on. For example, I did have a client, we reviewed their credit, and it did show that they had an address out of Georgia, and they never resided in Georgia. I had to look into it to make sure there was no identity theft. Now, just because there's something inaccurate on there doesn't mean it is identity theft. A lot of this stuff gets reported incorrectly, but it can lead us to research a little bit more, make sure that there is nothing really going on here. And then again, to check for any errors. And then I do have some questions on here. So if you had a collection agency contact you and you paid it off or got it resolved, does it still affect your score? Excellent question, Mia. I appreciate you asking that one on here. I'm just going to be very transparent and honest. On a collection item or charge off, it's going to stay on there for 7 years if you pay it off or not. Again, through some of these processes and using the Fair Credit Reporting Act, it may fall off sooner by disputing it. But yes, once you pay a collection item, if you pay it off or not, it's going to stay on there for at least 7 years. And Clara is asking another amazing question on here. How often should we review our credit reports? I would say rule of thumb from my end is it's twice a year. Now, you know what? If it's okay, I'm going to do that now before I forget. I'm going to put in here the service that I like to recommend for my clients to review their credit. Let me just credit.report.com. I am sharing it on here on the Everyone tab. And so this one goes through Experian. And this one on here, you're able to download the app and it notifies you of anything that is going on. So if you apply for a loan, if you a new account, new collection or anything, it'll alert you right away. There is a way, sorry, let me backtrack. So with that one, it gives you Experian for free. And there is an awesome hack on which they haven't figured out, but I've been doing it for about 5 years now on how to get all three of them for free. So that's with that service on here, it has a premium version where it lets you get all three credit reports and all three FICO scores for once a month. Now the thing is that it has a 7-day free trial period. So let's assume you go in there right now, get Experian, you're able to do the premium membership, get all three reports, and then cancel it down. And I've been able to do that for my clients about for every 30 days, because for my clients, I need to review this information about every 30 days. And it just works perfectly on there. Because if not, it does have about a 20, I think like about $30 monthly fee on there. But that is a hack on how to get that information, those three credit reports. And like I said, you just want to review them, make sure everything is okay on them. Does your credit score fluctuate while you're on a credit freeze? It can. What I mean by that is, let's assume, so a credit freeze, what it does is that it prevents somebody being able to apply for a loan without your consent, right? You have to be present or you have to make that phone call unfreeze at first, but there's still stuff going on your credit, like your payments and your credit card balances. So it is very common to see that your score does fluctuate regardless of the freeze on there. What the freeze does is, like I said, it should prevent anybody from applying using your social for a loan. You all are asking some amazing questions on here. Any questions so far before I head to the next slide? Well, actually, I do think that the next slide is, let's talk. Questions, comments, or social observations. That's one of my professors used to say all the time. That's why I included it on there. But I'm going to put this slide on here too, just to kind of give you our contact information. That way, if you do have any questions. But at this point, I do want to open it up, see what questions you guys have for me. What credit card would you recommend to get for the first time? Awesome, Jacqueline. So if you are of 18 years old or just starting off credit, applying for an unsecured credit card would be a challenge. An option is to apply for what's called a secured credit card, where technically you secure the credit card with a deposit. So I'll just share one that I like is through Capital One or Open Sky. It's okay. I'm going to put this on the chat on here. Um, I'm typing this up. And so Capital One has the option for unsecured or secured credit cards. And the reason I do like to mention Capital One first is because they are able to, since they offer both, they are able to turn a secured credit card into a unsecured credit card without having to reopen a new account. And I know some people might be asking what is secured and unsecured. Um, an unsecured credit card is the one to apply and you do not have to make a deposit. It's just based off of your credit worthiness. So let's say you apply for a Target credit card. Um, and then let's assume you apply for a Target credit card. They see your credit, you're doing well, and they'll give you a credit card where you don't have to make a deposit. You have to make your monthly minimum payments. A secured credit card, you do have to make that deposit. And Liz just asked, does a secured credit card help your credit score as much as a regular credit card? And the way it gets reported is the same way. In fact, the credit bureaus don't see if it's secured or unsecured. It's more with the bank. So secured or unsecured does not really affect your score. It can, let's assume you're buying a house and they see that all you have is a secured credit card. They might question that. That's something I would be too concerned about. Um, Especially, I mean, since secured credit cards are meant to establish credit, so it's not something that I would be too concerned about. But just to answer Liz's question directly, they both affect your score the exact same way. You guys are making me work this afternoon. We had some awesome questions. Hopefully, there wasn't too much information. Is it better to apply for a credit card or personal loan? It depends what you're using it for. I guess without knowing the full context of what you're applying for, I like credit cards because they are revolving. So let's assume I need to go. Let's assume right now with the holidays, I need to buy some Christmas presents, right? I might get a credit card, put it on the credit card, pay it off over a couple of months, and then I know it's available there if I need it again. Now, kind of going back to it is that I do always recommend that you have both, that you have a personal loan and a credit card open at all times. So if it's something that you're looking into, and especially for establishing your credit, you can looking into both on here. Does the amount of debt affect as well? That's another awesome question on here because you're when you buy a house or a car, they look into what's called your debt to income ratio. And what that means is how much you owe into comparison to how much you make. And they go based off of the debt that is reported to your credit bureaus. And so if you have a lot of debt on there, they might, even though your credit score might be good, they might see, oh, well, this person is doing good on their loans, but they are maxed out. They're not going to be able to afford a new loan. So it can affect you in that route, if that makes sense. So it's not necessarily with the score, but it's what's called your debt to income ratio, which is more on the financial side, but that it does affect you on there. It's one of those, and I love how Mia asked that question on here, because yeah, the whole purpose of this is that yeah, in order to have good credit, we have to be indebted, but hopefully with what we learned today, it'll give us the skills to use that to our advantage on here. So by no means am I telling anybody to go get fully in debt on here, more than anything, if you are establishing credit, just get that one credit card, one loan on here. Make sure your credit card balances are below 25% of its credit limit, and make sure all payments are done on time.
Are there any more questions for Enrique? All right, Enrique, it looks like they're all questioned out.
Awesome. But thank you so
Yeah.
much for this opportunity down here. And yeah, hopefully we answered some questions and got some good information out there. But thank you guys so much for your time. As I had mentioned, this is something I'm super passionate about. Hopefully you enjoyed it and got some good information on it.
Yes, thank you, Enrique. I feel like I learned a lot myself. The audience
Awesome,
was
awesome.
engaged. So we want to thank you for presenting for us and taking this time.
My
We hope
pleasure.
you'll come back. Just saying, it was a wonderful session.
Yes, ma'am. Of
um,
course, it'll be my pleasure.
Oh, thank you so much. So I would like to thank the audience for coming and having lunch with us while we were learning about our credit. And we'd like to tell everyone to have a good semester. Wish you all luck on your finals and happy holidays. This is the last TVE for the fall 2024 semester, but we'll be back in January with TVEs once again. Thank you all, and we hope you have a wonderful weekend.